Hi, I hope you're all doing well. I'm here today to read out Christine's story. Christine is from the UK and it's quite a tough story, and so it does come with a little bit of a trauma warning. And so without further ado, I shall read Christine's story now. My name was Christina Barry. The Barry is Irish, so I'm half Irish from the region of Tipperary. My birth mother was Margaret Barry, and she was one of 13 children. It was when I was 13 days old that Margaret abandoned me in a mother and baby home in London. I was taken into care in Kentish Town, into a residential nursery, but I failed to thrive. I didn't sit up or walk until much later than most. Then, due to being considered delicate, I was moved at 8 months to a residential nursery in Eastbourne for a further 8 months, which I strangely recall some nice vibes from. At 15 months in Eastbourne, I was visited 3 times by a couple who would eventually foster me. After the third visit, I went home with them. They wanted to adopt me, but it was complicated. Without Margaret's whereabouts known and with no signature, Surrey Council could not allow the adoption. They searched for Margaret for 2 years. Just after my third birthday, I was adopted by them. I remember it clearly. Wearing a fancy outfit, I was lifted onto my adoptive father's shoulders. It felt exhilarating. I was driven home from the court in Croydon in a posh car. One therapist later said this sounded like he'd got a trophy. They were called John and Franca Andrews. John was born in 1913 and his parents were a middle-class white woman from Hampshire in southern England and a Romany gypsy. So he was mixed race and culture and plus had English and Scottish heritage. He later became regimental sergeant major in World War II. Franca, she was born in 1923. She was born in Bari, Puglia, southeast Italy. They met in World War II when they were both married at that time to someone else. Some of my best memories are going to Italy in 1968 and my early days of my adoption, which I cherish and I call the bubble. We had bungalows in Jaywick-on-Sea near Clacton-on-Sea in Essex. I loved the calm and the freedom there. Wonderful early holidays right by the sea and soft sand in our rather small home, which my adoptive father said would be mine one day. At the beginning, there was warmth and there was love and good wide family connections. Things seemed settled and life felt okay for a while. At primary school, I did well. I tried to be the best in everything, always raising my hand, seeking approval. My adoptive mother's Italian family were all very kind folk. They hugged me. They were funny, they showed emotions. They cried and laughed and got angry sometimes, but were open and demonstrative. I seemed well liked by the family. I had about 3 uncles that were invested in my fun and happiness. We had Italian gatherings around long noisy tables, very sociable, music and dancing. Later I was told that I had been very spoiled with lots of new clothes, some handmade, toys and books, and we had a nice house with a very big garden. As my adoptive dad earned good money, we definitely had all the mod cons in the early 60s. It was also a strict upbringing. It was structured and regimented, which worked well for me. It meant I knew where I stood and I knew my boundaries, but I followed mother around. It was all very old-fashioned, but things started to unravel. By about between 5 and 7 years old, Dad lost his job and turned to alcohol and women. I started to see some domestic violence at home, and there was abuse from my mother towards me, and it became extreme and severe. In fact, it was sadistic at times, and she'd put pillows over my face and sometimes tie me to the bed. She frequently neglected to feed me, and I was at times near starvation. Our neighbours wanted us out of the area, which added stress. They probably saw us as too loud for their liking, or maybe as outsiders. I wonder if this intimidation caused psychosis in my mother. A neighbour said my mother was a monster. In fact, life became a horror story. We moved from Surrey to Tottenham, and Dad wasn't around much at this time. The starvation was reaching a pinnacle. I was locked in my room for 3 weeks and eventually taken to St. Anne's Hospital. A matron at St. Anne's said the police wanted to talk to my dad. Neither of them visited me. I was later discharged against medical advice. By the time I was 12, our relationship had deteriorated so much that I was like a lodger. There were rumours at this time around that my father had committed a murder. I later saw in my adoption notes that were last-minute concerns about my dad's history and my mother's daughter in Italy, who she'd never mentioned at all. There were also concerns raised about my father's time in the army. But the case manager had decided not to share all the details in court because I was well settled, and John and Franca seemed very keen, in inverted commas. I was attending Catholic school at age 11 or 12, and I won a poetry competition for the Haringey Arts Council on loneliness. I read it out in assembly. But the obvious neglect was noticed by the school. I don't know if they saw me as vulnerable and lacking support, but when I was 13 or 14, a teacher there raped me. It was after this time that my first attempt at suicide happened. The physical abuse from John and Franca stopped around this time, maybe because they were getting older, but the neglect continued. We moved to Portsmouth when I was 15, and I was really struggling. Then I was told I was adopted, and I became deeply traumatised and catatonic. I didn't speak for around 2 years. I just existed, and I had no real interest in anything. They mentioned the word regret regarding my adoption. My mother said I was weird. My therapist said it's the worst abuse case she had ever heard. On a retreat once, I was told that my adoption was unscrupulous, a word I had to look up. My story displays a total failure by the school services, the police, health visitors and the GP, all of whom did visit or see me in my environment. After I left the family home, I went into nursing and did various training courses. Eventually I became a Macmillan nurse and working with AIDS. I was one of the first and last. This was the highlight of my adult life, but I became unwell and burnt out. I later found out that Margaret had moved to America. I have 2 half-siblings on her side and they live with her there. I also have one half-brother from a different father in London, also adopted. I found out about my half-brother in my 30s. He looked like me. Sadly, he died at 17. I found all this out through a genealogist, and I managed to get birth and marriage certificates and addresses, etc. I met Margaret for the first time at Heathrow Airport in 1983. She had sunglasses on. She looked very young, but she just talked to my cousin who'd accompanied me. Didn't even speak to me. I've now had no contact for 6 years with her, and I will not see her again, although she surfaces every couple of years and puts pressure on me. She didn't tell people she'd had me adopted. She says mean things about me and then returns to America. She leaves me high and dry. It's an abusive cycle. My birth father was Thomas Graham, originally from Newcastle, but later he moved to London to make a living and ended up working as head waiter in Kensington, Chelsea area in 4-star hotels. I discovered he worked later at the House of Commons in hospitality management. He married an Irish woman and had 4 children, one of whom is Sharon Graham from the Unite Trade Union, who represents the miners, and one is an actor, not sure on the other 2. I have lots of information from Facebook and DNA records. That side of the family have no interest and have outright rejected me. Both my adopted parents died before I was 30 years old. After my adopted mother's death, I went for my first private Gestalt therapy session, and I went for 5 years more. My first self-help book I read at 32. It was called Adult Children of the Emotionally Disturbed. The main thing I got from it was that we have a heightened sense of responsibility for everything. Fast forward to 2024. After lots of time off, I'm back at work part-time. I'm sociable and I have many friends, but I haven't had a partner since 1999. I get out and about and I go on holidays and trips. My brother is my only family now. He doesn't talk about the past ever. He finds my mental health challenging and he sees me about twice a year. Luckily though, I do have good contact with my nephews. There are some coincidences. I worked for Croydon's adoption panel for 2 years, 1996 to 1998, the court that allowed my adoption. I went to a Carisbrooke House, Tulse Hill, to complete a volunteer bereavement counselling course whilst I was a district nurse, aged 27. This building, I found out later, was the very same social services building where I was abandoned by my birth mother at 13 days old. The very same address. So that's a very difficult to read story that has been sent in by Christine. Christine is still working through all of the issues that she has experienced as a result of her early experiences of adoption and then later further trauma. She's been diagnosed with bipolar, PTSD, CPTSD, and she's neurodivergent and dyslexic. Christine has also struggled with addictions and has been on an alcohol addiction program as well. So yeah, things have been quite tough for Christine, but thank you for sending your story in, Christine. I hope things will get a bit easier as time goes by and that you can find the support that you need. Thank you for sharing with us. If you've got a story that you'd like me to read out, please do send it in. As you may have noticed, the stories that I've been reading out are very difficult stories. Those are from adopted people who have really had struggles. Now, the vast majority do have struggles, if not all. But I'm also interested in hearing from people who have worked through it all and who have found some modicum of peace and inner tranquility after having worked through all of the issues. And if you're one of those people, I'd really like to hear from you. I think it would be very helpful to read stories like that and to highlight that there can be positive outcomes. There are positive outcomes for many people who decide to kind of work through some of this stuff. And yeah, so if that's you, I'd really like to hear from you, and you can contact me in the through the website, which is listed in the description box below. Thank you for being here again and for listening to Christine's story, and thank you, Christine, for sending it in. We'll see you soon. Take care.